We are here with Martin Uhlarik, who heads Tata's global design. We are at Tata's India Design Center at their plant in Pune. And here is the man himself who will tell us what's going on, what's hot, what's coming next. So, Martin, let's start with what's keeping you busy these days?
Oh, a lot. We have so many programs happening. We are working on design for commercial vehicles, passenger vehicles, and electric vehicles, all three business units. And all our three studios are absolutely flat out full with a full deck of work. You know, we showed two concepts in April, and obviously we are now working on the production versions of those two concepts. And there's a lot of other things that we're going to be showing to you over the next 24, 36 months.
Great. And speaking of those very concepts now, they were, symbolizing your Gen 2 and Gen 3 electric cars. Just to get an understanding, what is the difference in the design process given, the platforms will be fundamentally different. So how do you approach it from a visual perspective?
Yeah, the Gen 2 product is obviously a product that has to balance an ICE powertrain plus an EV powertrain. So it's always this medium compromise in terms of finding the balance between the two, but creating a dynamic and modern and desirable product. So that's the challenge when you're doing a Gen 2 product. Things like what you've seen with the Curve, even the Nexon, is considered a Gen 2 product. Then with a Gen 3 product like the Avinia concept, that was a clean sheet of paper. So when we started that, literally design was the one leading the development. So it wasn't that we got a package from a platform. We created, this is the dimensions, this is the proportion that the vehicle should be. And now we are working with engineering together to basically deliver the promise that we showed in April.
And, now the Avinia was very interesting because it was not a shape that we've seen before.
That's right.
As you had said, it could be anything. Which leads me to the question. Now, Tata Motors has established itself as a leading player in SUVs.
Yes.
But how long do you think this SUV trend will continue? And, with the flexibility of a skateboard architecture, is the traditional SUV shape as we know it going to be replaced by something like, a more monospace
yes,
like design?
Actually, the Avinia is this sort of hybrid type of vehicle. When we launched it, we described it as, a little bit SUV, a little bit MPV, and then a little bit premium sedan, or premium hatch, I should say. And it's this sort of hybrid. The lines are getting very blurred, and you're seeing the market fragment even more. A couple of years ago, we probably wouldn't have seen a product like the Curve, a coupe SUV. But now you're seeing, diversify a lot more. The reality is that SUVs are the mainstream. They're not a trend anymore. They've been around for the better part of 20 years globally. And there's a lot of reasons for it. People like the safety aspect, the command driving position, the feeling of freedom in the traditional way, like you feel like I can go anywhere, even if people are just driving to work or driving to school or something like that. So it has a sort of psychology behind it. But now you're seeing it, it's not just a traditional SUV, like what it used to be, what you would remember, like a box-like truck, vehicle. There's many forms of SUV. And like I said, the lines are getting very blurred as the market fragments. So there's opportunities, but definitely we are investigating other typologies which are not just SUV that will show in, I guess, the coming years.
Okay. Now, sticking to EVs, in a slightly distant timeline, what we've seen is wheelbases are getting longer,
Yes.
To house the battery pack. Do you foresee that still being, the guiding dimension for how vehicles will be shaped in the future?
I can't predict the entire industry, but definitely for us, the reason why we made the wheelbase longer on our Gen 3 vision was because we put the emphasis on the interior. So it was about maximizing the interior experience, and we feel that the interior is actually equal, if not maybe sometimes even more important in the future than the exterior. Traditionally, it was the exterior drove the proportion and so forth. Now it's a form follows function. And if it does the job correctly in terms of a purity of purpose, then the proportion will look beautiful. The Avinia, that silhouette, which is very dramatic, wasn't born that an exterior designer drew the exterior. It was actually, we positioned the people in the middle in the vehicle, and then we said we want to move the wheels out. And by moving the wheels out, then we said let's move the windscreen forward. And then when we drew that center line, we had this very dramatic center line, and that makes the car look longer than it actually is. It's a 4.3 meter vehicle, but it looks like it's
huge.
it's huge, but it's not.
Yeah.
It's all playing proportions and optics.
Okay, and just sticking to the Avinia, another interesting aspect of it was there was no touchscreen inside, which
That's
is
right.
something which you just expect to see, and touchscreens are getting larger and larger.
Yes.
And you had said something quite interesting, that you foresee a future without touchscreens and it'll shift to voice. How soon do you expect that shift to happen?
Well, that's definitely a manifesto that we are working towards. The reality is, you will have displays, but I don't want it to be a display-focused interior. Yeah. The displays are there to give you information that you need, whether it's for infotainment, driving, safety, so forth. And the screens, for lack of a better word, can be positioned in various areas, but they're not the focal point. And definitely, we are looking at different ways of interfacing. So voice, we feel, is really the future of interface. I see it generationally, between, Gen X, Gen Z, millennials, Gen Alpha, and all that. The way they interface with consumer electronics, there's a definite shift from what used to be analog to then touch to gesture to now voice. And we feel like the automotive industry is actually going to be going down that road as well. So you'll see in the next products that we show that, just like we showed with the Sierra concept in 2020, and then when you saw the Avinia, there's definitely a topic that we are working on and developing here in Pune.
Okay, and just to get a perspective from your present lineup now, Tata Motors infotainment systems are, say, behind the curve. Do you think that this approach, perhaps voice focused, would give you a chance to leapfrog ahead of rivals in terms of technologies? Yeah,
that's definitely one area where we can make a jump, like you said, a leapfrog. The other area is, there's a constant, attention to detail that needs to happen, in terms of the PQ, the quality, the interface, the fidelity of the screen, and so forth. So, the industry is constantly, accelerating. So you see consumer electronics, how quickly they are, moving. So the auto industry has to be much faster to keep up with that. And definitely, we are, really working hard to play, not just catch up, but actually leapfrog, not only the competition, but just meet the customer demands. Because, we are very used to our phones and we're used to, the screens we have at home and so forth. And so when we experience that in our life and then we sit in a vehicle that is not up to the same standard, then you feel disappointed, and it illustrates negatively on the brand. So definitely it's a pressure that we have to face.
Yeah. Okay, now we'll just shift focus to the present lineup and what's coming in the near future. Starting with the Nexon, it's been an absolute hit. And as we were discussing, it's gone against the curve,
Yeah.
It's been picking up over time, and it's touching
new highs. The older it gets, the more vital it gets.
Yeah. So just talking about the Nexon, it's the EV derivative. Again, it's been very well received. But do you see that there was a need to have that, very distinct link to the ICE version of the Nexon? And is that something, is that an approach you'll be following in the future? Or do you think that the product is now strong enough, so maybe a next-gen Nexon EV could be a very different looking?
The difference between an ICE and an EV, because, Gen 2 is in many ways an interim step. We're already developing Gen 3, so at some point, we're going to just leapfrog and just create the EV derivative, but that's not going to happen overnight. So there will be quite a significant number of years where we have, both powertrains. So it's obviously, as a business, you have to find the sweet spot between the two and differentiate them. We definitely want our EVs to communicate down the road or visually that they are an EV. It's not just being teal, or a different color. So. And as you said, the Nexon itself as a product is a really evergreen product. Its sales have just gotten better and better the older it gets. And I think a part of it is, it's had a constant intervention. It was a pioneering product when it was introduced, an SUV, but with a very dynamic character. For the Indian market, it was very, very unique. And then, of course, there was the facelift, which gave the front and the overall feeling, the interior, more quality and a much more, I would say, with presence and a stature. And then the third version was the electrification of the Nexon, which again mimicked the Nexon in general, which is it is a pioneer product. So it's had these 3 levels of always like a booster shot in its life cycle. And here we are, and it's one of the best-selling products in the country.
And just touching upon product interventions, like the Nexon had a major facelift. What we've noticed is that what used to be maybe a 9-year product cycle became a 7-year product cycle,
right.
and now it's getting shorter. And maybe within 3 years of launch, you have to give it a comprehensive facelift.
That's right.
So, I mean, how much stress does that put on the system? Are you designing probably the update alongside the actual first out?
To be honest, the updates, what used to be traditionally the MCE or the facelift, you had that 4+3 or 3+4, sort of orthodoxy. But I think that's going completely out the window now. I think, there's going to be a constant intervention, constant upgrade for the product. And, the product might even have a longer life cycle than, you would expect. But actually more than the traditional. Traditional facelift was a new set of wheels, maybe a new bumper, some new 1 or 2 new colors. But I think what you'll see the interventions become much more comprehensive, and that the car is in a kind of perpetual update mode just to keep it relevant.
So comprehensive, by that you mean sheet metal changes?
Potentially, yes.
Maybe even working around changing the glass house?
Depends. It depends on the product. I mean, different products, obviously different investment and so forth. But I think it definitely, that sort of, like I said, 4+3, system where everybody in the industry followed that, I think you'll see become much more flexible, for lack of a better word. And it puts more work on the thing. So when you're designing the product, you have to almost game the whole portfolio of like what gets updated when are you introducing new products, when, and so forth. So it's a huge chess game in terms of the portfolio.
And Martin, just talking of trends, you've been with Tata for a few years. Have you noticed something which is very specific to India? And just building on that, do you see a very defined Indian car design language coming out? Something like, an Italian car is an Italian car.
That's right.
Are we heading in that direction?
Yes, I think we are. I mean, India is a very young country when it comes to the automotive industry. And not only experiencing like the market, but also like, designers, who are, born and bred, Indian, but, also global experience. So we always refer to it as global India. That's kind of the aspiration of what we want to create as a language, which is, it's a vocabulary that's clearly Tata Motors, but actually is very, honest and upfront and proud of the fact that it's born in India. It's an Indian brand. And when you think of India and you think about the warmth, not just from a climate point of view, but the warmth as a society and a very social culture. And then when you look at the aesthetics, I constantly look at architecture and just the design and also the fashion industry here in India. And you take lots of elements and inspiration like that. Obviously, you don't want it to make it a pastiche. You don't want to make it a cliche. But at the same time, it's a culture that is very rich in an aesthetic. And, whether it's color, whether it's patterns, whether it's a vocabulary and all that. And of course, we have, a design team here that is working on a number of projects. And of course, we have, design teams globally. It's a very cosmopolitan team. I think we have something like 18, 19 nationalities in our design team across the 3 studios. And it's all cross-pollinated. So, you don't want to make something that's very generic, just global anonymous. It has to have an identity. And I think any brand that's successful has to be true to its roots and true to its identity. So definitely, one of my aspirations is to create a identity that's clearly coming from this place, but is also authentic.
And Martin, just your thoughts as a designer. There is this conception that more chrome equals a more premium product. What are your thoughts on that?
No, I think that's actually now, you can have bright work or you can have, a lot of like flourishes, but I think chrome as a material is definitely, passe. But you can communicate that value in different ways. And it's twofold. I think, first of all, chrome as an environmental process is extremely inefficient and is not a sustainable process. But at the same time, you can communicate that sort of, like I said, value through different ways. So like I said, we've got a couple of ideas. You'll see probably in about less than a year. which will, I think, answer your question.
Okay, and just
And you saw actually with the Avinia P1, which was, the concept, which was that we had a lower grille, which was actually an illuminated graphic. And so we were bringing that sort of jewelry effect, but through a digital process. So that's an example of how we can communicate, communicate value and a face, but without using a traditional material.
And finally, another trend that we are seeing with more and more concepts is, this focus on sustainable materials. Inside, is it lip service, or a lot of those things actually going to make it to?
Sustainability is not just a trend. It's actually the future, and we have global climate targets, which then translate into government legislation, which translate into corporate responsibility. And so, sustainability for us as a company, and I think for everybody individually, is a responsibility. So yes, when you do a concept is a sort of free thinking lab for ideas. So we show like, oh, here's this cool material, here's this and all that. But of course, all of those ideas, just like the show car itself, has to translate into some sort of production element. So already, this morning we had a meeting about a program, and I was saying, how are we going to translate this into a production program? And, of course, you have, again, those cost targets. I think, like with electrification, sustainable materials, at the beginning, it's expensive. And then, of course, the more mainstream it becomes, the cost comes down. So what you'll probably see is, we'll be offering, options. You can buy these sustainable materials, but there is maybe a pack. Maybe you have to pay a price for it. But some people are willing to pay the price for it, just like an EV. And then what'll happen, it'll accelerate and it'll become mainstream.
And finally, Martin, now ICE cars, they're a long way from dead. At least in the Indian context, we've got at least a decade plus of life in them.
That's right.
And at the same time, Tata Motors is also really going deep into the EV world. So you have very distinctive customers. How would you be, catering to these two very distinct sort of buyers?
Obviously our ICE customers are mainstream customers. EV is the future. We do see that tipping scale, as electrification, mainstreams. But actually, as electrification mainstreams, there will be less overt, EV-ness about the product. They probably will become more mainstream visually, aesthetically. There'll just be good design for that matter. And then the people who want to, shout out that I have an EV, I guess it's the difference. Like if you look at today, an ICE car, if you have somebody who has a normal vehicle, it's maybe quite, anonymous. But then the person who has the sort of hot version, he's the one who's, maybe got a brighter color, louder engine sound, and communicates more, look at me. So I'll probably see the same sort of trend with electrification, that electrification becomes a mainstream powertrain. And then you'll see within electrification, maybe different ways of communicating the type of vehicle. Some vehicle might be just a family car. It doesn't need to scream that it's, doing anything special. And then you might have some other type of vehicle that says, look at me.
Awesome. So I think we've got a lot from you.
Cool.
So thanks, Martin.
All right.
And hope to see whatever concept you're working on here at the
or
design
production
very soon.
All right.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank
Pleasure.
you so much.
Thank you.